Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Using a Self-Directed IRA for Passive Real Estate Investing, Fix and Flips versus Buy and Holds. I'm Erica Figueredo, the Marketing Specialist here at Next Generation, and we have a very exciting presentation for you guys today. But before we get into it, I wanted to review a couple of housekeeping items and tell you a bit about Next Generation, and then I'll allow our speakers to introduce themselves and get into today's conversation. So, as always, today's conversation is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing for anybody that didn't have a chance to make it live, or if you are here live, first and foremost, welcome, but you will be able to rewatch this again. We'll probably send out the recording at some point tomorrow, but definitely 24 to 48 hours. So we do want to hear from you if you are here live, so please take some time to introduce yourselves in the chat box, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen on your GoToWebinar control panel. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and what brings you here today. Also on that control panel, you'll see a questions tab. You can use that or the chat to ask any questions. And I'll try to get to questions as we go through the conversation, if it's applicable, but otherwise questions will be held until the end. We'll also be doing some polling. So we'll ask you guys a couple of questions throughout today's webinar just to keep it engaging. We want to hear from you, so make sure you guys are paying attention. I'll talk now a little bit about Next Generation, what we are, what we do, and what we're about. So we are a custodian and administrator for self-directed retirement plans. So they're a lot like the retirement plans that you'll find at a brokerage house like a Fidelity or a Charles Schwab. The biggest difference being what you can hold within those accounts. So with self-directed accounts, you can invest in alternative assets, which include real estate and other things like private equity, lending, cryptocurrency, which has been hot, precious metals, social causes, impact investments, and much, much more. It's very, very, very broad, and your options are pretty unlimited, but that's just the umbrella of what it allows. So about Next Generation, we have Next Generation Services and Next Generation Trust Company. Next Generation Services is our headquarters and administrative firm, which is headquartered in Roseland, New Jersey. They provide the record keeping and tax reporting for all of our client accounts. And in addition, we provide the education and the educational content that you'll see here on today's webinar, as well as a lot of other different opportunities for you guys to get educated via our website, like our white papers, our blog, our newsletter. So please head over there, get subscribed so that you are up to date. And then Next Generation Trust Company, which is located and chartered in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is the custodian for all of our client accounts, which just means that they are the ones holding title to the assets that are held within our clients' accounts. So just moving on to something that we want to make pretty clear, which is our very necessary disclaimer. Next Generation is not a bank or fiduciary, so we do not provide any financial, legal, or tax advice. Any information provided on today's webinar is for educational purposes only, and we do encourage you to consult with your trusted advisor or trusted professional to determine if this strategy is something that works for you and your retirement goals. So with that being said, I'll hand the floor over for speaker intros. First up, we have Dylan DeBellis, who is the marketing director and leads business development for the PIP Group. So Dylan, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks. So I know you guys probably saw an advertisement of Charles being on. He's actually with a client today. So we're really hands-on and one-on-one with our clients when they come down here and want kind of a showing of their property. So with that said, I'm Dylan DeBellis, the marketing director, business development. I started with the company about 4 years this year, and just kind of take on a bunch of roles from spot inspections to, you know, a little dabbling in HR, and then client conversations and onboarding and everything like that. That's pretty much it.
Erica, are you on mute?
You're mute.
Yes, I am. That's nothing new. So next up, we have our Director of Marketing and Sales, Brittany Melville. Britt, tell us about yourself.
Hopefully I'm not being too redundant. I know a lot of our subscribers have probably seen me on almost every webinar we've done, but I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales here at Next Generation. We're hailing out of New Jersey as well. Like Dylan, I'm actually coming up on my 4-year anniversary with the company as well. Our team is focused on really spreading the word about self-directed IRAs as a strategy, and in doing so, providing education to individual investors and financial professionals that would like to learn more about it. So that's what we're here for, and we'll be talking to you today about the real estate piece specifically.
Thank you, Britt. So now that we have our speaker intros out of the way, I'll hand the floor back over to Britt. I'll go silent for a while until we hit polls or questions. So until further ado, Britt, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Erica, for the introductions and for moderating. All right. So we're going to talk about passive real estate investing, which is a strategy that can be a great fit for a self-directed IRA. And we can talk a little bit more about why that is later. But one of the things I also wanted to mention is when everyone registered, we asked what you wanted to learn. So we did go through and review those responses when we put this together to try and make sure we addressed as much as possible with respect to what you guys are looking for to get out of this session. So we're going to try to hit on those things. But we want to start first at a high level talking about passive real estate. And so we have our expert here, Dylan. So Dylan, can you talk to us a little bit about the best approach when we talk about distressed properties and fix and flips, buy and holds with distressed properties? What's the best approach to searching for properties?
Sure. And just to touch base on a little bit of today's webinar real quick, I have 3 properties that I'd like to show, kind of like a live tour, if you will, of different stages. So we'll go through one of our most distressed properties. I'm sure everyone, it's kind of has some shock value to it. But how we find our houses, it's one of a few ways, but never one way, just because we like to tap into all the veins of the city, if you will. So we used to find foreclosures was our main bread and butter, kind of where we would find our distressed properties. Obviously, with the moratoriums, in place and no evictions happening, that vein has pretty much dried up. So we've had to get creative. So a lot of probate houses or homes that land into heirs and they just don't want them, or they're out of town. They live out of town. Some wholesalers, but you got to be careful with wholesalers. It's kind of like, we like to call it like the Wild West with wholesalers. You don't need any education to become a wholesaler. So they some of them know what they're doing. A lot of them don't know what they're doing. So you got to it's like a full-time job just dealing with that sector of it. And then we do find 1 or 2 on the market, but you won't get the best returns usually if it's listed on the MLS.
Gotcha. So those like probate situations, so where do you actually go to like find them? Do you have a network or?
Yep. So we've been in Savannah for 20 years now. And our main focus was tax liens for a while, and then we got into fix and flips. But we've through that 20 years, it's just about building a database of people that that either lawyers or real estate agents or just other people in the community. And a lot of times, like even contractors, that are working in the area, sometimes they'll have like a lead on properties as well.
Okay. So having a strong team of other professionals that you can interact with on a regular basis can be helpful, and your experience allows you to leverage those relationships you have to find good opportunities, is what I think I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Like kind of like saying your network is your net worth kind of thing. Like it's all about kind of building, and it takes time. Like if I'm a brand new investor, I can either hire a company to do the work for me, or I can start ground up, and that's it's the time frame of building ground up, of building these network connections. That's the most challenging part, especially if you're brand new green into this market kind of thing.
Yeah, and not only the time frame, but like the time itself that's required to invest and the energy that's required to find, build, and nurture those relationships over time. I imagine that's a lot of work as well.
Yeah, and that's a full-time job as well. Some people get into this, and as the webinar is called, passive. So I get into this thinking it's going to be passive. I'm either retired or potentially soon to be retired, and passive becomes a brand new full-time 60-hour-a-week job dealing with everything. And we'll go through the property next door, and you guys can see instantly that fixing this property next door is not a part-time passive job if you're doing it individually.
Okay. And what types of properties should one look for if they're interested in doing these? So I think you talked about the different types of distressed real estate a bit, but is there any more you wanted to explore on that with us?
Sure. So when we head out and start looking on either adding a new neighborhood to our kind of market of choice, if you will, it goes into a bunch of things. So in Savannah, what we do is we're following SCAD around, and it's a huge college. It might sound kind of small because it's just an art school, but there's actually a campus in, I think, Tokyo. There's one in here, Atlanta. There's another one around too, but the school's really large. So what they're doing is they're buying up, all these distressed properties themselves, turning it into either new school buildings or administrative buildings or dorm rooms even. So they're not going to fail. They're built so they don't fail. So we kind of just follow. That's one key thing is we follow SCAD around buying up residential homes next to them. And we know that either A, we can offload them as dormitories or faculty housing, or, just knowing that there's going to be jobs in that market. Also, Amazon just stated that they're coming in to Savannah, which is huge. They're developing their warehouse right now, fulfillment warehouse, and the amount of jobs that's going to take to fulfill this warehouse, they're going to need to live somewhere kind of thing. So there's some key factors, not only the property itself, but, economically or the city, how it's structured kind of. I mean, you can't do that in Kentucky or I'm sure some places you can, but, the city and the environment is just as important as the actual bones of the house itself kind of thing.
I guess that's why people say location, location, location. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
not just being focused on the properties themselves, but looking at it more of like a macro level, like you're saying, like what market activity is taking place? Are there any sort of like flags popping up to let you know that, hey, there's probably going to be some opportunity here, as far as, like you said, seeing what this the school is doing, seeing Amazon coming in, and that's not necessarily going to be the case everywhere. So that's a good point about kind of like taking a step back and looking at the trends that you see that are likely to impact the real estate market within that space. Yeah,
Right.
sure.
There's a guy, I believe his name's Marco. He does kind of what we do in a similar market. And he has a saying that's live where you want, but invest where it kind of makes sense, So it's not built for everywhere. And that's like a lot of people get in or watch these reality shows and think like, oh, I'm just going to do it down the block from my house, which they might get a profit. But there's definitely, for that amount of energy, doing it in an area where it's robust and coming up and there's still distressed properties, you can get a lot more bang for your buck, if you will.
If I remember correctly, I think it was Charles that said in the first webinar we did with you guys, part one, be careful about deciding with your emotions when you're purchasing real estate. And I would imagine that investing passively can kind of give you that distance you might need from yourself to, to mitigate the chances of that happening. Because I know when people get personally involved in a property, it can become emotional, and it can be difficult to separate those things from a business perspective.
It's a great point, and it's huge. We love out of town investors because we've taken on a few investors that live in the area. They want to be on site every day. They want to be asking questions or telling us how to landscape. And if you're just looking at the numbers and longevity, we make the numbers work. But if you're there on site every day, like you said, the emotions come out of it. And when there's emotion, maybe you start picking higher end materials, or you just start doing things differently, and that's when you start eating at your profits, kind of thing.
Very true. So I don't know when you want to kind of show what you want to show. We were going to talk next about like some real life examples. So would this be a good segue into that?
Sure, yeah. Excellent. And I've never done this with my laptop, so we're going to kind of just all explore together. But this is one of our properties. You can see the new siding. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
So this is one of them. This is all new, new siding, new porch. Okay, that's our other one right next door. We'll get over there. That's the one that's going to have all factor. So this is all new siding. Everything is kind of built the same way. We do the same thing over and over. It's like a step and repeat, no emotion. So we're down to studs in here, just materials and studs. So we're going to go through this and just redo this from ground up. Like I said, all this was gutted, new everything. We just got new windows in, new doors, new floors, new walls, new siding. Everything's inspected. Everything's to code. Savannah's not playing this year. I don't know if COVID woke them up, but now Savannah's code enforcers are out and about. Maybe they were bored last year, but they're not this year. So everything's by the book, legit. Here's upstairs, same thing, down to the studs, and we will rebuild up. And this property, it's a little bit new in this market, which is good that we got in here. There's a lot of distress still. This is the porch. So a bunch of properties that are still distressed, which we like to eat them all up if we can. Here's our property next door. So this is one.
How long will something like the one you're showing us now, how long will something like that take?
So we like to, I mean, it depends on the amount. Like this is studded down, so everything's new. So this one might be, 6-7 months, maybe even longer, depending. And we can give ballparks, but like I said, sometimes we hit snags just like anything else. So if we open a wall up and there's a termite infestation, that's going to push us back 3 months or so. Whereas an individual investor, you take a termite and that's your only property, that's almost, it's almost done kind of for, you can't really bounce back from that. Those 3 months are going to eat all your profits up. Whereas like when we have so many going on, we can swap kind of thing. This is the one that I want to show you guys. This one, this is a beaut. So as you see, when we walk in, we are outside still. There's nothing in this
down
house.
to the bones.
Yeah, so that's the other property right here that we were just in. That's down to the studs. And then if you come around here, right next door, no walls, no anything. So this is like a complete rebuild. So we do everything from cosmetic to slapping some paint on to, well, everything. This is, so this one's going to take a little longer. Obviously, there's some foundational things we got to do and a little bit, a little work on this one, but this is what I'm saying. So this is not a passive investment if you're doing it individually. It is a full-time gig, just getting the permits, getting the inspections, getting the contractors if you don't have them. just doing the work. Contractors like to be wishy-washy, so they kind of come and go, and then again, it's your network. So if you got a good network of contractors, then we can move forward more fluidly. But if not, it's a full-time job.
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot of work. How do you determine whether to, when you're renovating these properties, whether to just do a short-term fix and flip or to buy and hold them? How do you make that determination?
It's that would be kind of, what do you want to do as an investor? And both of them are in this market. We have a really strong buy and hold market due to the school system right here and the port that's right here. We have 2 Army bases, an Army and an Air Force base right here. So we have a lot of people that are looking for rental properties. So it's A, your market, and then B, what's your exit strategy? Do you want to be involved in this property for the next, 1, 2, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, which is a good strategy, because then the market, hopefully you're in a market that inflates. Savannah does. I think it's like 12.7% over the past 5 years. Every year it's been inflating, something like that. So, you buy and hold, you collect the cash flow, and then maybe offload in 5 to 10 years. You're definitely going to see a sizable return, but you got to have tenants 5 or 10 years. Do you want to go through that, or do you want to just get in and get out, 9, 10, 11 months, and, you'll see your profit. So it's more or less, as an investor, what you kind of want your exit strategy to be, if you're in a market that kind of allows both of those exit strategies. Some markets, we do a lot of tax liens in Illinois, not a flip market. You can't flip them just because you get in. By the time you put 20, 30 into it, it's already at market value. So the only option there is buy and hold in a lot of those demographics in Illinois. Got
it. Very interesting. Yeah. So then you work with the investors that, or I should say, the investors that you work with on a specific property are more so making the call to tell you what they want to do, whether they want to flip it or hold it. Do you make any recommendations as part of that conversation?
Sure, and that's kind of our job as a service provider. So at the end of the day, the investor is 100% the owner. So we kind of just work on their behalf. We've been doing it a lot longer. We don't have an emotion attached to it. We read the numbers, we do our due diligence on the properties, and we understand how the market's swaying. So we have more a better educated response to like what's going on. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to sell, they want to sell, and we'd have to work something up in the paperwork. But we definitely give advice as far as what we think is going to be good. A lot of times there's like buildings in the back, old garages, for maybe we didn't think about converting it to a mother-in-law suite or maybe even another apartment, but we'll go to the investor and say, hey, we have this dwelling in the back. We can convert this to a rentable property, and it's going to increase the value of this property by $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and we only got to put 20 into it. And some investors say, cool, go for it. I have an extra couple thousand laying around, and we continue to make that garage into a livable mother-in-law suite that can be rented out. And some say, no, I'm cool with just flipping it. So we'll just kind of keep the garage as a garage or whatever it is.
And you mentioned earlier that the investor pretty much owns the property directly in most cases. So even if they're working with you and you're actively managing the project, essentially they would have ownership of property on the deed.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, the deed goes directly into their entity, LLC, or the SDRA custodian on behalf of John Smith. There's one service we offer, which is a partnership program. It's the threshold is a little bit less to get into. And I don't want to go too salesy. I know we can't, so we can answer these questions. But the partnership program is just a lower threshold where we basically enter into a partnership with the client. And then in that case, we're kind of just 50-50 partnership kind of there. I would have to check on the exact percentages, but yeah, the partnership program is also a very good aspect. But then that way we would both be owners in the property and not 100%. That's the only way we would own property for a client.
I can see the appeal of that partnership option for those that might have limited cash flow, at least to start. Maybe someone's looking to get started and they don't have enough for a full cash purchase, or they're just looking to partner up to get started. So.
And the beauty with that, just real short, is that we're not going after smaller properties. We'd still go after properties just like this. Is that we kind of leverage hard money using our 20 years of experience. So we get a really good loan rate. We get a really good, points on the back. Everything is 100% rehab budget comes back just because of our experience and our relationship with these lenders. So the cash that's needed is less, half as less. But we're still going after the same property, seeing the same kind of returns and everything like that as well.
Okay. So I'm thinking this might be a good time to switch gears into how this works with an IRA. But before I do that, is there anything I failed to ask or anything else that you wanted to touch on?
We can continue there. I just have one more property that I want to show. It's like 3 minutes down the road. So once we get to that point, you guys can kind of go over SDRA stuff. And
we can do that now if you want. We could shift gears and I can talk about the self-directed IRA piece while you're making your way over to the next property. So feel free to do that.
In the chat, I'm posting a link of this property. It's a Zillow link. This one's 90% of the way done. For anyone that's watching, you can follow the link. And there's some before pictures. That's the only reason I'm posting this link. So you can kind of see. And then what we're going to go to is how we do pretty much every house. Every house has the same, interior paint. Every house has the same kind of setup, the same kind of tiling. And that's why we say we're not emotional about it. We know that, if a contractor starts on one of our properties for whatever case may be, he can't finish. Every other one of our contractors has the same paint. So he can come in and just pick up where he left off kind of thing. So it's never downtime. And it's always kind of a smooth transition if that case may be. But if you want to start talking on the internal stuff, I'll go on mute and 3 minutes down the road and then I'll hop back on.
Sure, that's perfect. Thank you, Dylan.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. All right, so I'll try to keep everyone entertained for the next few minutes while we're waiting for Dylan to get to the next property. So obviously today we're talking about passive real estate investing, but we also want to talk about how you can do that with an IRA, and that's a big piece of it. And we also did get a lot of comments in the registrations about wanting to understand that a little bit more and how does that work. So really quickly, Erica did a great job of summarizing what a self-directed IRA is and what some of the assets or what are some of the investments that can be included. But just to sort of recap from the previous webinar on our last discussion in terms of the benefits of doing it this way, because that might be a basic question for someone who's new to this too, is like, why should I even use a retirement account or think about doing this instead of just using my own personal funds? So one of the things that's beneficial about using self-directed IRAs for private investments like real estate is the ability to have more control over your investment return within your own retirement account. So typically we think about our IRAs holding stocks, bonds, and mutual funds or anything that's publicly traded. And those things tend to be subject to lots of volatility, which we've seen much of over the past couple of years as well. And we just don't have a lot of control over those things, right? And what's going to happen. So by expanding your portfolios, your retirement and long-term wealth building portfolios to think about including these types of investments like real estate, for example, you're spreading out that exposure to the volatility. And if you know that you're going to get or you're expecting a particular return on a real estate investment that's going to outpace what you'd be getting in the stock market, then you're able to kind of take a little bit more control over your retirement planning and accelerate that wealth building beyond. Of course, the other advantage is going to be that you're using a tax advantaged account. rather than using just an LLC that you own in your own name, or just using your own personal funds to do this. In which case, of course, if you were to buy and hold or fix and flip, you'd be subject to paying tax on your investment earnings. Whereas when you funnel this through a self-directed IRA, you're going to either defer your tax liability on anything that you're making, or if you're using a Roth account, you're going to completely eliminate that tax liability as long as you're taking the funds out after you reach retirement age. So there's obviously that benefit as well. So we talked about a little bit about the process for getting an account set up and kind of how to get started. And I just want to go over that and recap that real quickly. So I'm going to share my screen here. And Erica, if you could just let me know if you're able to see it. I just want to make sure everybody's good.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, thanks. So I thought it'd be helpful to just provide a visual for this piece of the discussion, because it is a lot to think about, especially for someone who's new, and there's just a lot of logistical questions we typically get. So let's say that you wanted to use your IRA to invest in a fix and flip or buy and hold or do some sort of passive real estate investment. The first step in doing that would be to open a new IRA. So you can have as many IRAs as you want. If you already have IRAs, that's okay. But if they're not self-directed IRAs, they're not going to allow you to hold these investments. So in order to do so, you need to open specifically a self-directed IRA. And then you choose your account type, which could be traditional tax deferred, a Roth IRA. If you are a business owner or even a real estate agent yourself, you could qualify for a SEP IRA, which basically allows you to put more money in out of pocket and start building that value up for yourself. A simple IRA for small businesses. And then there are also other types of plans for business owners, like solo 401ks and other types of qualified plans that would allow you to set up accounts or utilize existing retirement plans for your business and perhaps expand them so that they can include these types of investments for you as well. So opening an account just requires completing an application electronically, and that takes about 1 to 2 days, excuse me, for the custodian to open. And then next, of course, you're going to determine how you plan on funding your newly set up account. So if you have existing retirement accounts, often there are ways that you can move some or all of the funds into a self-directed IRA without incurring a penalty or tax liability. So if you have an old employer plan, like a 401k, for example, you can usually roll that over into a self-directed IRA. If you have existing IRAs with other custodians, you're able to transfer funds from the other institution to your new self-directed IRA. And then you would obviously have cash in your self-directed IRA to start investing with. And if you are a business owner, a lot of times the way that you get money into your accounts is by making personal contributions. So taking money out of pocket and depositing into the plan. And the IRS sets annual limits on how much you can put in, but if you're a business owner, they tend to be a little bit more generous. So those are some things to think about. The process for getting the funds moved over can take as little as a few days or a few weeks, depending on how quickly we're getting responses from the other institution and the method by which the money is being sent over. And then, of course, the last step in the process is, you've set up your account, it's funded. Now you work with your custodian, your self-directed IRA provider, to make an investment for you. So we'll talk in more detail about kind of how that works after Dylan shows the property, but just high level, when you get to the point of being ready to make an investment, you're basically, the IRA holder, is working directly with the custodian, and then the investment sponsor, whatever company you're investing with, to submit documentation that the custodian will then review. So for example, if it is you're buying real estate, it could be the purchase contract, or if you're partnering, like we talked about a bit ago, it might be a partnership agreement that you would typically be entering into and signing, but rather than you signing in your personal name, the custodian signs on behalf of your IRA, and everything would be titled to the IRA, which enables it to have all those tax benefits. So the custodian does a thorough review of the supporting documentation for the investment, and also accept a direction of investment from the account holder to basically determine how they're going to carry out the transaction, basically how much money is going to be invested, where the funds need to be sent, how they're to be sent. That is all determined by the account holder and then basically just directed at the custodian to carry out those instructions. So the custodian would then send the funds out of the IRA over to the investment, and then any return on investment gets paid directly back to the IRA, and that goes to the custodian, and the custodian deposits it into your IRA for you. So now you have more cash in your IRA, and then you can determine what you'd like to do with that cash. You can reinvest it in more projects. If you want to take some of that cash and move it back to your traditional investing in the stock market, you can do that. Or you can also use it to cover perhaps any expenses that might be associated with an investment you're doing. So the process all in all usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks. It could be shorter, it could be longer. It's just a conservative estimate that we provide because there are some factors we don't have full control over, like the other institution holding your funds, enabling those to move over to the new account, and some of the documentation that needs to be submitted and then reviewed by the custodian. So I just wanted to cover that. And now that we have Dylan back with us, let's take a look. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's take a look at what you've got going on, Dylan.
Awesome. So this is basically 90% done. There's a few things we're still working on. There's actually some guys here working. So this is the outside of what it's going to look like, or what it does look like. There's other 2 properties, or at least that one that was super gutted. It's pretty much the same size. So this is almost a flash forward, if you will, of what it's going to look like. So this is, like I was saying, it's like agreeable gray or something like that. Every house of ours has the same color pattern. Again, new windows, new plank flooring.
Is that vinyl?
If you guys got the, yep, vinyl plank flooring. That's our standard. What we use. All areas like a kitchen and bathrooms, they get retiled. We've been using this butcher block a lot on residential homes that we know are going to go for like 150,000 instead of doing quartz or granite. That I think it looks really nice, and it's really functional, and it kind of saves some money versus going straight quartz or whatnot. So if you guys got to go on the Zillow link that we sent out, you could have saw that this house was not anything like this. This whole kitchen's rebuilt. And this looked just like that other one. It was gutted down to the studs pretty much. Here, this bathroom, new tile, new everything. So this was down to the studs as well. And this is how 90% of our homes look, unless they're beach houses on the water or something, because we do some high-end properties. If it's a single residential house like this in Savannah, this is kind of where we're aiming, is just doing standard stuff. Everybody has this flooring of ours. All our contractors know. Everyone has this paint. Everyone has these doors. So it's really, once we get in the property and we buy it, we kind of just get right to work. And there's no kind of downtime from that. So it's like a seamless thing. But like I said, it was all about networking. So we have I think something like 7 to 10 crews going on all the time, and they all, like I said, have the same material. So it makes it for, it makes it for being seamless on the investor side. For us, it's every day we got to kind of be on. We're out in the field 1-2 days every week. Charles is out here right now doing site inspections. His wife. It's really hands-on, and like I said, it's a full-time gig. If you're an individual, it's a full-time gig for us as well.
Well, it definitely looks very clean and crisp and fresh now that it's been done, the property. And it sounds like, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but you could just see how like the vision is, from them other 2 properties. We walk in and we're like, oh, this is beautiful. We understand it. But on being a consumer side, you might not be able to see that. But when you get into something like this, and just to showcase not emotion, instead of going and doing vinyl siding like we did the other one. We just painted over the cinder block. I think it looks really good still, and it's fitting for what the neighborhood is. But we just knew we followed kind of the numbers instead of an emotion where I wanted to look prestige and brand new. We can still make it look new and then kind of have a little bit more money on the back end, if you will, because we didn't go with the brand new siding. It does the trick, if you will.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're able to scale because you have a network that is familiar with how you approach projects, and you use a lot of the same materials so that you can be as efficient as possible, but you also do have room for flexibility, like recognizing, the option to paint over something rather than replacing. So there's some customization to a point, but also that scalability of having the experience and all that. And I think your connection is a little fuzzy right now, Dylan. See if we get you back.
Yep, absolutely.
There you are. Okay, you're back. We lost you briefly.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how this tour would work. It's first time kind of doing something. I'm running off of my mobile hotspot, so if I do break up, I apologize.
No, it's okay. I appreciate it. So with the time remaining, we'll take a couple minutes to talk a little bit more about the IRA investment process. And I know, Dylan, that you also have some experience working with IRA investors, so feel free to comment on anything that I'm mentioning here.
Sure.
But a common question might be, if I'm investing with my IRA, how is the investment structured? So using what we talked about today as an example, if the IRA wanted to invest passively in this type of a structure, it could be that the IRA would actually be on deed to the property. So the property be purchased in the name of the self-directed IRA rather than the individual account holder. And in that case, we would just need the purchase contract, a copy of the recorded deed when available, and then if there's any sort of agreement, like an agency agreement, for example, that's to be signed between the investor and a company that's going to be actively managing, then we also take a look at that so that we understand, how is that company that's providing, management and et cetera, being compensated, right? And then how does the IRA get paid as well? So we understand the terms of that structure. Like, for example, if the company's getting paid on the back end, then the IRA is going to pay that fee. So these are the things that we think about, right? Expenses and income associated with the investment flow in and out of the IRA itself. We don't want to commingle an investor's personal funds to cover pieces of something that the IRA owns, because the IRS does have certain rules and restrictions around that, which we're not going to get into today. I know we covered it a little bit in the last webinar, but for the purposes of today, we just want to talk transactional. And then, of course, if any questions pop up about limitations and restrictions, we can always go into it. Do we have a question?
I actually have a question. It just came to mind. I know that we don't really cover it, but I did want to just bring up the fact that in some cases, or I would say in many cases, when you're considering using a self-directed IRA to do a real estate transaction, can you talk a bit about why the passive nature and doing things passively may benefit the self-directed IRA from a tax advantage perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that that ties into what we're talking about a little bit as far as rules and restrictions. So just very high level, the IRS does have certain limitations on who can invest with the self-directed IRA, so who can do the transaction with an IRA and who's benefiting from the IRA's investment. And a lot of the restrictions that the IRS has have a lot to do with the relationship between the IRA and the IRA holder and their family members. So they basically don't allow the IRA to do direct transactions or for any of what they call disqualified persons to benefit from the IRA's investment. And those disqualified persons are family members like spouse, ascendants, descendants, and their spouses. So to Erica's point about investing passively, it tends to be more favorable for a self-directed IRA because you're not putting yourself in a position where you're tempted to kind of do anything that would skirt the line and get into any of those restricted relationships or prohibited transactions, which could incur penalties and fees for the IRA. So doing this as more of like an arm's length, hands-off type of investment, you know, if you're investing with a company or you're just kind of doing it yourself through your own IRA, enables you to kind of keep some distance from those relationships that might become potentially problematic. Yeah.
And that would include sweat equity, correct?
Correct. Yep. So the IRS wouldn't allow, and that's a really good point, because the IRS, not only do they not allow the transaction to take place with disqualified people, but they also don't allow disqualified people to personally benefit or add value directly to the investment, which obviously would include sweat equity. So for example, like if Dylan was using a self-directed IRA and he wouldn't be able to invest in one of his own projects that he's working on personally, because then he'd have to be involved in, you know, if he was planning to be involved in fixing up the property and doing the work himself, his IRA wouldn't be able to get into that investment because of the conflict of interest. So, yeah, hopefully that helps clarify some of that. Good question, Erica. One of the other structures, aside from just directly investing in the name of the IRA, is doing it through an LLC. So we get a lot of questions about that. Can I, if I'm using my IRA to invest in real estate, can I still use an LLC? The short answer is yes, you can. It's commonly referred to as checkbook control in the world of IRAs. And the reason for that is that basically the way it would work is the IRA would invest into a newly formed LLC. It would have to be an LLC formed specifically for the use of the IRA. It could have other partners in it, but it can't be one that you already personally own or that your family owns or any of those restricted relationships own. So a new LLC is formed, the IRA funds it with cash, the IRA becomes the member of the LLC, and the IRA holder as an individual could be a manager of that LLC, which would then give them access to the LLC's business checking account, which is basically then going to hold the funds, the IRA's funds. And by doing so, they're able to, you know, write checks. They could have a debit card for the IRA. Credit cards are not allowed because you can't expend credit in a retirement account, but anything that would be pulling cash, available cash directly is fine, so debit or check. And in that case, if someone didn't want like their actual IRA name on the deed, then it would be in the name of the LLC that they've set up. And you can, of course, name that LLC anything that you want. It's anything that the LLC is earning goes back into that checking account, and then it can also be liquidated later on and then flow back into the IRA, of course, until at such point someone wants to take money out of the retirement account. So it has to be sort of a closed loop system still, but there is the option to use an LLC in that way. Yep. And we talked already about investment documents that we would need: purchase contract, the deed, and then like an agency agreement, for example, that might apply to investing passively through another organization. I think that covers everything. Did I miss anything, Erica?
No, I don't think so. But we do have a couple of questions, so I wanted to get to those before we wrap up. Both of them actually are related to UBIT, UDFI, so I was hoping you could spend a few minutes just talking a bit about that and how that might affect a passive investment.
Sure. So UBIT and UDFI are two types of tax that could apply to an IRA's investment. UBIT, which is technically the acronym's UBTI, stands for Unrelated Business Taxable Income. That's more so going to apply not really in a passive investing scenario, but more in an active investing scenario. So if an IRA is actively doing a bunch of fix and flips, and within 1 year they're doing handfuls of fix and flips, then that could be perceived as generating like regular operating income as if they're running a business, right, through the IRA. And the IRS doesn't like that because if it's generating operating income, then the idea is that it should be subject to paying tax, just like other businesses that may compete with it. So they don't want the IRA to have an unfair advantage to essentially running a business within itself as a retirement account. So if that were the case, when income is over a certain threshold, the IRA could technically do it, but the IRA is going to be responsible for paying a tax on that revenue. So it doesn't really apply in this case. Where the other one could apply, UDFI, which stands for Unrelated Debt Financed Income Tax, is if an IRA or an instrument the IRA is invested in uses leverage to acquire an asset. So that could be a loan. And in that case, it's not to say that this always applies, but if there is leverage involved, it could be that the percentage of the IRA's income or earnings, I should say, percentage of the IRA's earnings that is attributed to the debt may be subject to that UDFI tax. So it's important to understand what that is and whether the investment that you're getting involved with involves leverage. And then usually somewhere in whatever you're signing or whatever you're agreeing on, it should be noted that that may apply, whether or not it does. And it's not the end of the world necessarily, because if the leverage is, if that percent of leverage is relatively low, or if it's decreasing over time, then of course that UDFI responsibility decreases over time. But it is something that I would say is important to be aware of and discuss with a tax advisor that is familiar with self-directed IRAs, so they could perhaps advise on the best way to structure it for your particular situation. There are ways to structure investments that could avoid that as well.
Cool, thank you. I think that was it. I know we didn't get to any of the polling, but that's okay. I know today's conversation was a bit more unique in that we weren't strictly talking about anything, very, very high level. And I think that those polls kind of addressed things that are pretty high level. We got into a bit more specifics.
Do you want to run them now, Erica, while we have a little bit of time?
Yeah, just so that we can learn a little bit about our audience while you guys are still here. There's one that I'm missing, so I'll ask it, and if you're comfortable, you can paste your answer into a chat. But to get started, we'd like to know what types of retirement accounts you currently have, if you do have one. So I'll launch that, and then we'll see what the responses are. Give you guys a couple more seconds. Okay, let's close this out and see what we got. So it looks like a majority of our audience has either a traditional or a Roth, but then there's also a good mix that have either an employer-sponsored plan like a 401k, a 403b, or a pension, SEPs and Simples, solo Ks, or anything else like a health savings account or an education savings account or any other type of qualified plan. So it's a good mix, but all of those account types can be self-directed. So if you want to learn more about that, I will paste a link into the chat later on when we close up. That way you guys can continue your educational journeys. Second poll that we have is, what types of investments are you interested in? I know today we're talking about real estate, so I'll assume that most of you guys joining today are interested in real estate, but as you know, and as we explained, there's a lot of different other ones that you can invest in, so we're just trying to gauge kind of where your interests lie. So I'm putting that one out right now. I'll give you guys a minute or two. Okay, we'll close that one out. And healthy mix here. So we've got equal parts real estate, private equity, and lending. So per the audience, pretty expected. And then the last poll that I have, which unfortunately I don't have loaded, but I do just want to ask, and like I said, if you are comfortable, you can either put it into the Q&A tab or the chat tab, but I'd like to know where your retirement balances are at right now. So under 10K, over 50K, between 100 and 250, 250 to 500, 500 to a million, over a million. Let us know where you're at. So I'll open the chat for that. And while you guys are entering your responses, don't worry, I'm not going to make anything public. It's just for our personal knowledge. But what I am going to do is have both Brittany and Dylan send me your contact info so that I can get that into the chat in case anyone is interested in following up. And then what I'm going to do is paste our complimentary educational session link into the chat as well. That will give you guys the opportunity to get some one-on-one time with one of our IRA specialists, and essentially we'll just be able to determine your readiness for opening a self-directed IRA. We'll determine what retirement accounts and balances that you currently have. We'll talk about investment interests and things like that. And it's a great way for you guys to not only get educated further, but just get that, one-on-one time to determine if, this is something that might work for you. So just give me a moment. I will get the contact info sent out. So we have Dylan, who's info@pitproof.com, and then we have Britt, which is new accounts at nextgenerationtrust.com. Also, we've got a phone number, a couple of phone numbers. We've got Britt, and we've got Dylan. So all of those are in the chat. You guys can head over to the chat and you'll see it there. And then I'm going to paste the educational session link as well. So give me 1 second. And so for this, it'll ask you to fill out a couple pieces of information, personal information, and then it'll bring you to our Calendly link, and that will allow you to pick a time that not only works best for you, but will go right to one of our IRA specialists' calendars and at your convenience. So with that being said, thank you everybody for joining today. We'll have obviously more webinars coming up next month and the months following, so stay tuned. If you would like to know how to learn about when and where to sign up for our webinars, please head over to our website and sign up for our newsletter. We also have a webinar subscription, so you can subscribe to that as well. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Dylan. And everybody have a good day.
So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for your time. Take care. Thanks, Erica.